Hello everyone, this is Grandmaster Pascal Charbonneau for the Chessable Masters by Chess24 game of the day for the third day here. We had a day where we had to say goodbye to a few players, and players qualified for the next tour for the quarterfinals with a bit of a dramatic finale there with Hikaru Nakamura winning his last game against Daniel Dubov. Daniel Dubov plays very exciting chess, maybe the most exciting player on the tour because he has a lot of fresh opening ideas, and his game today, which he played in the first round of the day, was an incredible game, and it showed his deep preparation, but also just a freshness of ideas and an aggressive style that's really fun to watch. Unfortunately, by losing his last two games, he lost to Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura in the last two games today. He is not going to make it to the quarterfinals, so our winner of the previous event is not moving on. This was a really, really tough group, this Group A. I mean, really, both groups are very tough, but Artemiev, that he beats in the first game, has had a solid performance. And there was really no weak link. So this was a tough day. This game is amazing. It really showcases his style, deep opening preparation, and then really, really aggressive play. So it starts with D4. He is a fairly consistent player in terms of playing D4 openings. The game, again, features a Slav. It's very popular opening at this level. And after E6, Bishop G5 suits Dubov's style very well. Is very aggressive. A lot of deep opening preparation in these lines. Whether black goes for the Botvinnik with D takes C4, or whether they go H6, which is another main move, and then there's either the bishop H4 sacrifice. There's also a ton of theory with bishop takes F6, which is, of course, beyond the scope of the analysis of this game. And then finally, there's the move that Artemiev plays, which is knight BD7. And Artemiev is a young, very, very talented player. If he has one weakness, it's probably that his opening repertoire is not quite up to the standard of the rest of his play. And in this game, this shows I think he can be targeted, and Dubov had prepared this variation for him. So we'll see how it goes. So Dubov plays E3. Queen A5. This is called the Cambridge Spring variation. If you're interested in learning it, we did mention the Sam Shanklin course already, but this happens to be part of the Sam Shanklin repertoire. And certainly is not, it is a coincidence that I'm picking two openings in a row that feature this. This game is really amazing, so you will see. But if you're interested in learning more, I'll tell you where it diverges from that repertoire. So knight D2. That move breaks the pin and controls the E4 square. One of the ideas of Queen A5, I'll move the knight back here. There's a pin against the king on E1, and so in a lot of variations, black can play knight E4 and exploit that before white has time to castle. So knight D2 is one of the main theoretical moves, and now there's several variations here. Bishop B4 is the main one. There's also D takes C4, which you should keep in mind if you're just learning this opening, that the queen attacks the bishop on G5, so white normally takes on F6 there and then takes on C4, which surrenders the bishop pair, but this bishop of black's on C8 has a tough time coming out. So it's a very different type of position. Bishop B4 is a much sharper variation. Now Dubov goes for the sharpest move. He plays rook to C1. And this is a genuine pawn sacrifice because the rook abandons the defense of the A2 pawn. And so at various points here, black can attempt to take this pawn. And so this is not what happens in this game right now. Black castles first. Now, if you're looking to play this variation for black and you're going through Sam's repertoire, Sam recommends the move knight E4 here and discusses it at great length. So he plays a different line, so you wouldn't have ended up in this variation in the game here. Black castles, and now Dubov plays bishop E2, after which black has a genuine possibility of taking this pawn on A2, and he does. But Dubov had something prepared, and so that's the amazing thing about his preparation, is that it's deep, it's very aggressive, and often it's not like it outright wins, but it's just it goes beyond what the engine, first line, second line. He's not just looking at the computer and playing the first move. He's looking really deeply at these ideas and finding sort of hidden gems, which is really sort of the secret to finding fresh opening ideas. So black takes the pawn here. It does look risky. On the other hand, black has no weaknesses per se. They're just a little bit behind in development, and their bishop on c8 is not very well placed. And Dubov plays queen c1. He's blitzing all this out, so clearly his preparation. Queen c1 defends the b2 pawn is number one. And number two, it threatens rook to a3, which would trap the queen. So black really has no choice here. They play queen a5, rook a3. The queen goes back to d8. And so this position has been seen in previous practice. You know, chess is like an evolving science, an evolving body of knowledge, you could say. And in this position, there was a game, actually, Dreyev, the very strong grandmaster, Russian grandmaster Alexei Dreyev, has played this variation for black. I saw he had 3 games up to the move, maybe queen c1. And in this position, he was playing against an American grandmaster, Molnar, I believe. And Molnar here castled and just played for sort of a slow build-up, saying, I have the bishop paired, I have dark squares, I don't need to do anything too quick. But Dubov plays e4. And e4 is a pretty amazing move because it's what it does is it prepares to open up the position for the bishop pair, which normally makes logical sense. It also gives the rook at a3 a great sense of purpose. That rook can come to either g3 or h3, depending, and with great effect. And at this point, he's saying, you know what, I'm probably not going to castle. And in fact, you see that even more after black plays probably the best move here, h6. Another move which is very hard to play if you've never seen this is the move e5, which leads to a totally different kind of position. But knowing Dubov, I bet what he had prepared was the move f4, and things get completely crazy here. Look at this pawn center here. 4 pawns versus these two. Pretty amazing looking position. But you can see without even looking too deeply that white has an impressive position with the bishop. For example, e takes d4, e5, this spin. It's a complicated position, but it makes sense that black would want to avoid this and think that they might be in big trouble. They have to sacrifice a piece here and see if they can get enough pawns. It gets really messy. But he plays the move h6, very natural move, and now Dubov plays h4. And if there is a common theme to these Dubov opening ideas, it might be that he likes to push that h-pawn forward. It does seem to happen in a disproportionate amount of games. In this case, it's very logical. He doesn't want to go back. He wants to attack here. He's threatening e5. It's clear it's not a real piece sacrifice because clearly h takes g5, e takes g5 is just a disaster, right? The rook is coming to h3. With mates on h8, you can't really expect to be able to hold this position with no pieces defending the king here. So it's not a real piece sacrifice. And Artemiev makes probably the most natural move here. He just says, you know, my queen's got to get out of the spin before he plays e5. However, after this move, already his position might be close to beyond repair. So even though it's the most natural move, maybe there was something that would offer better chances. Again, very hard to find. I mean, the move e5 is still a possibility here and probably deserves attention. I still think it's very dangerous for black. You could play possibly a move like rook g3, threatening bishop takes h6. Very difficult position for black to play. So let's look at the game. He goes queen e8, e5. Knight h7, that is more or less forced. It's not really the ideal square, but at least it stays close to the king. If we try to say, you know what, I'd like to trade some pieces so I can defend better. The problem with this is that this bishop, of course, wants to sacrifice an h6 in some cases, but it's especially strong if the queen can come to h6. And so unfortunately, the knight on e4, white can simply take it, pawn takes, and now with the queen defending that pawn on h6, bishop takes h6 is basically the end. The rook is coming to g3, so g takes, queen takes, and next move rook g3. This is already completely over. So knight h7, more or less forced. Sidesteps immediate danger. Rook g3, strong move. He's threatening bishop takes h6. Black, can almost never take this one unless they have some concrete way to get out, right? These positions, always super dangerous. Rook h3 is coming again. Often f6 can be met by g6. In this case, you can simply take because that opens up this diagonal as well. So it's not really an option that black is considering. So he plays after rook g3, king h8, normal, sidesteps the bishop takes h6 threat, knight f3. So this prepares bishop takes h6 and brings the knight also closer to the attack, especially the e5 and g5 squares. And now black plays a typical move. We see these in, if you look at the French defense, this move f5 is often played as a defensive resource. it grabs some space, because if white gives their e-pawn for the f-pawn by capturing en passant, black is getting rid of that very powerful space-grabbing e5 pawn. And if instead white decides not to take it, well, then black at least is able to bring, for example, the queen to f7, and their king feels a little bit safer. It also blocks this diagonal, right? So these are all important factors why this is a strong defensive move. And we were looking, I was doing the French stream for a couple of hours today because they were having some internet issues. We were looking at f6, and f6 is worse because here bishop takes h6 is very strong, and we were looking at that in the stream. The difference is that after pawn takes bishop, queen takes h6, now black is forced to spend time. There's a threat of mate on g7, and if they play f5, they've wasted if they play queen f7, they can't play f5 yet because of mate. And so here white has the opportunity to open up the position. In fact, this position is just, with a little bit of analysis, even e takes f6 is completely winning, but other moves as well, black is just unable to get out here. The computer loves a move like rook h3, which is sort of bizarre, but the idea is that you can do a plan like rook g6 and rook g3. Eventually, it's just completely crushing. So he plays f5. Now, if we try bishop takes h6 here, it's not quite as good. It still is interesting, by the way, and probably good, but not necessarily as strong, because at least white is not able to open up everything. The position is still closed up. The computer still thinks white has good compensation here after either knight g5 or a move like, again, rook h3, which is a difficult move to find for a human. But Dubov plays very logically here and starts to play for a positional bind. ef, knight f6, bishop f6, knight f6, and knight e5. Now, it's not clear that white is going to checkmate black, but for the pawn, they have sort of a very nice squares, right? The g6 square, the e5 square, their bishop is much better than this bishop. So it's plenty of compensation, more than enough compensation for a pawn here. Knight e4. Attacks the rook on g3, potentially attacks the pawn on f2. And now Dubov plays rook e3. A strong move. There were other possibilities, with a computer that might be stronger, but this game by Dubov is played very impressive play for the amount of time that these guys have, only 15 minutes on the clock. Note the f2 pawn is poisoned here. You can't take it with either the rook, because here rook takes e4. We take the piece that's defending the rook on f2, and rook takes e2 doesn't work. We take it back, so that would win a piece. And finally, knight takes f2 is met by a very cute move, castles. Could also play rook f1 actually, but castles is more beautiful, so we'll do it. And now if the knight moves, we have rook takes f8 check, followed by knight g6 with a fork. So Artemiev here tries to free himself, plays the move c5. And now Dubov plays an exchange sacrifice. I am a big fan of exchange sacrifices such as this one. He plays d takes e5 first, and then on rook f5, attacking the knight, he could play a move like f4 to try to keep his knight here, right? You want to keep the knight on e5. So in both the move that Dubov plays and the move f4, the idea is to keep the knight. But he plays rook takes e4, and that's a really nice exchange sacrifice. Now after pawn takes e4, queen c3, his knight is still a monster on e5. And so Artemiev has to find a way now to develop the rest of his pieces. White has a simple plan here. He's going to play either g4 followed by g5 and continue the attack. He could also consider playing rook h3 and rook g3, bringing the last piece that is not participating in the attack yet, get it to participate. So black has to hurry up and get their pieces out before it's too late. And there's two ways to do that. There's the move that Artemiev plays, which is b6, and there was a move bishop to d7. And both are sort of similar, but it's possible that bishop d7, just because it immediately gets the bishop in play, might have been a little bit better, because the problem with b6, as we'll see, is that the bishop doesn't come out yet, and in some cases, when if a queen gets to e4, for example, it will attack the rook on a8, and that doesn't happen if the bishop, is on d7 here. So white plays g4, the most direct move, And now Artemiev decides that this knight is worth more than a rook, and you can certainly understand his decision. I think other moves would be bad here. The idea, when he played b6, he knew that he was going to take this knight. After rook f8, white could simply play c6, and that's another drawback of having played b6 instead of bishop d7, is that this pawn can move forward. And now you can imagine a position where white could, for example, bring the pawn to b5, and this bishop on c8 is actually dead, right? It can never come out. So this can be a really difficult position, not to mention that white also has this plan of playing g5, which is hard to deal with, right? g5 opens things up. You don't really want to play h5 because that's not going to be a solid kingside structure. So Artemiev takes the knight on e5. White takes the rook. So now if we look at the material, white has 6 pawns, black has 7. They have 6 pawns as well, sorry. In some cases, they're up a pawn, but not here. And so the material is even, and as you can see, the black king, even though it's castled while the white king is on e1, it is in a worse position. Queen c6, probably not the best move, but a natural one. He could have tried, probably the best try was to play bishop to b7. And after g5, black can still try to fight into a worse endgame. But none of these are extremely appealing. But the move queen b8, for example, leads to an ending that black can at least try to fight in this position. These pawns are pretty terrible, so it's possible that white would just win technically. Probably start by playing either rook h3. Rook h3 is a nice move here to get away from any tricks with e3. You don't want to fall into king e2, e3 check, for example. So white is much better, but it would still be a game. He plays queen c6, which is logical. He's threatening the pawn on c5 and creating some ideas with e3, but tactically it just falls a little bit short. g5, nice move, is continuing the attack. Now, there's some key points here. He plays h5, almost forced, because if you don't play h5, g takes h6 is a big problem. And if he takes on c5 with the queen, then queen takes e4 not only prepares bishop d3, but keep in mind that rook, which we mentioned earlier, attacked on a8. So he doesn't want to do that. So he plays h5 to try to keep the position closed and try to, say, lure the bishop to take here, and when maybe the attack is not quite as fast. So he's happy to kind of give a pawn and try to survive. But Dubov doesn't let him out. He plays castles. Very nice move. So now e3 is no longer a problem, and we can see the point in that if black takes the pawn on c5 with the pawn, now he plays g6. So amusingly, or it's interesting, that this is much stronger with the pawn having been given up, because if we do it before, then black has queen takes c5 and the queen can defend the pawn on h5. So after b takes c5, then g6 would just win because the queen is going to get to h5, then to h7, and so on. So he plays queen takes c5, queen takes e4, attacking the rook, rook b8, queen to g6. A very nice move. Prepares a few things. Queen takes h5, but there's also the threat of queen e8, and there's also the threat of bishop d3. So there's a number of threats here. Bishop d3, by the way, will be stronger with the queen on g6 because there's not a defense like queen h5, because the bishop would be able to take it, right? It's a better battery than if the queen is on e4. Black plays queen f5, which is sort of a desperation move here, but he didn't have a way to save this position. Queen e8, king h7, and now Dubov could, it's always tempting to take a pawn with check, but he plays accurately till the end. Rook d1, very nice move. Prepares either bishop to d3, or in some cases, rook to d8. And also actually threatens queen takes h5, followed by rook d8, which would win the queen. So there's really no defense here. Artemiev goes for the last trick, so to speak. Bishop to b7, queen takes b8, queen e4. And this looks dangerous because of the queen g2 threat. However, Dubov had bishop d3. He had probably foreseen that. And with that, he wins the queen and the game. So just a quick summary here. I think the impressive preparation here that started with this move e4, a very logical move, but not a move that the engine really likes at first. So it's a move that it considers sort of with a lot of time, combined with this idea of meeting h6 with h4 and building an amazing attack, once you see it, it makes all the sense in the world. It's just hard to have these ideas sort of in your back pocket as Dubov has so often. So really impressive game by Daniel Dubov. We're sorry to see him go in this event. And I hope you enjoyed this game of the day, and I'll see you all tomorrow.